Why empires fall? In 410, the city of Rome was sacked for the first time in 800 years. The citizens were stunned. How could the eternal city fall? But here is the truth historians rarely say out loud. Rome had already been dying for 200 years. The sack was not the collapse. It was just the moment everyone finally looked up. Every great empire in history has fallen, and every single one of them followed the same pattern, the same sequence of cracks, the same stages of decay, in the same order, whether they ruled 1,000 years ago or 100. In this video, we are going to walk through all 7 stages. We will show you exactly how it happened to Rome, to the Ottoman Empire, and to the British Empire. And we will leave you with a question that is impossible to ignore once you see the pattern. Let us begin. They all believed it. The Romans, the Mongols, the British, the Ottomans. They built in stone because stone does not rot. They carved their names into mountains. They drew maps with their borders at the edge of the known world. And then, one by one, they fell. History is not a straight line. It is a cycle. And at the center of that cycle is a question we have never quite answered. Why do great powers collapse? Historians have argued for centuries. Edward Gibbon blamed moral decay. Arnold Toynbee pointed to a failure of creativity. Ibn Khaldun, writing in the 14th century, identified something he called asabiya, a social cohesion, a shared sense of purpose. And he said the moment an empire loses it. The countdown begins. What is remarkable is not that empires fall. What is remarkable is that they all fall the same way, not identically, not on the same schedule, but the pattern, the sequence of cracks that appear before the final collapse, is strikingly consistent across cultures, centuries, and continents. Historians and political scientists have identified these stages. They are not a prophecy. They are a diagnosis. Stage 1. Overextension. It begins with success. An empire expands because expansion works. New territory means new resources, new taxes, new prestige. But every border added is a border that must be defended. Every province annexed is a province that must be administered. The empire stretches. And as it stretches, it thins. The Roman Empire at its peak covered 5 million square kilometers. The cost of holding it was bleeding the treasury dry before any enemy had raised a sword. Stage 2. Fiscal crisis. War is expensive. Administration is expensive. Maintenance is expensive. And as growth slows, the revenue needed to sustain the machine begins to fall short of the machine's appetite. Taxes rise. Currency is debased. More copper added to the silver, more paper printed against less gold. The purchasing power of the state erodes. The Roman denarius, once 90% pure silver, fell to less than 5% by the 3rd century. The Ottoman treasury was bankrupt long before the Sultan admitted it. The British Empire borrowed its way through 2 world wars it could no longer afford. Stage 3. Institutional decay. When money tightens, institutions begin to hollow out. The army is underfunded. Judges are bought. Bureaucrats who once served the state begin serving themselves. Corruption is not a moral failure first. It is an adaptation. When salaries cannot be paid, soldiers find other ways to survive. When courts are underfunded, justice is sold. The historians call it institutional decay. The people living through it call it something simpler. They call it rot. Stage 4. Loss of social cohesion. Ibn Khaldun's asabiya, that shared sense of belonging, of common fate, begins to fracture. The wealthy elite retreat behind walls, literal and metaphorical. The middle class is squeezed by taxation and inflation. The poor feel abandoned. And the common story, the idea that we are all part of something worth protecting, stops being believable. Elites stop paying taxes. Rural populations disengage from the capital. The provinces begin to wonder why they bother. Stage 5. External pressure. Empires in decline send a signal, visible to those on the outside. The signal is weakness. Rivals test borders. Migrations intensify. Groups that were once held at the frontier begin to push through it, not always because they are stronger, but because the empire is no longer strong enough to hold. The Visigoths did not destroy Rome in a single day. They had been knocking at the gates for decades. What changed was not their strength. It was Rome's willingness to answer. Stage 6. The crisis of legitimacy. At some point, the question shifts. It is no longer how should we be governed. It is why should we be governed by these people in this way. In the Roman 3rd century, 26 men claimed the title of emperor in just 50 years. The Ottoman Sultanate in its final decades had rulers changed like furniture. The legitimacy of the throne was no longer assumed. It had to be seized and re-seized. When a government cannot answer the question why us with anything other than force, its days are numbered. Stage 7. Collapse or transformation. The final stage is not always dramatic. Sometimes empires end not with invasion, but with a slow, quiet dissolution. Borders contract. The emperor's writ no longer reaches the provinces. What was one becomes many. Sometimes the empire transforms, its bones becoming the architecture of what follows. Rome died. But Europe was built in Roman stone, with Roman law, with Roman roads still carrying traffic. Collapse is an ending, but endings are also foundations. 3 empires, 3 different centuries, 3 different parts of the world. The same anatomy. Rome, by the 5th century, was a bureaucracy too large to feed itself, an army paid in debased coin, and a population that had stopped believing the city on the Tiber spoke for them. When Alaric sacked Rome in 410, many Romans barely noticed. The empire had already left. The Ottoman Empire, at its height the most powerful state in the world, spent its final century contracting. Military defeats exposed fiscal insolvency. Reform efforts were strangled by entrenched institutions. Minorities were scapegoated as internal unity dissolved. By 1923, the empire that had ruled from the Balkans to the Arabian Peninsula was reduced to a nation. The British Empire, which at its peak controlled a quarter of the world's land surface, did not fall to invasion. It dissolved under the weight of 2 catastrophic wars it financed with debt, nationalist movements it could no longer suppress, and a home population that had stopped believing the project was worth its cost. Different languages, different gods, different centuries, the same 7 stages, in the same order. The question history leaves us with is not whether empires fall. The question is whether the people living inside them, inside their comfort, inside their certainty, inside their stone, can see the cracks forming before it is too late. Ibn Khaldun wrote his analysis in the 14th century. He had watched 3 dynasties crumble. He believed the cycle was inevitable, that power seeds its own destruction, that comfort erodes the very qualities that built the empire in the first place. But he also believed something else. He believed that understanding the cycle was the first step toward breaking it. Every civilization that has ever fallen left behind the same lesson, written in its ruins. It is not the sword from outside that destroys a great power. It is the silence from within. 7 stages, 3 empires, 1 pattern. The frightening thing about studying collapse is not how different each story is. It is how familiar they all feel. If you want to go deeper, Ibn Khaldun's Muqaddimah, written in 1377, is still the sharpest analysis of why civilizations rise and fall ever written. Edward Gibbon's Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire is long, but worth every page. And Peter Turchin's Ages of Discord applies the same framework to the modern world. If this video made you think, hit like. It genuinely helps this kind of content reach people who are looking for it. Subscribe if you want more documentary style history that skips the noise and goes straight to the pattern. And the next video in this series looks at something just as fascinating. Not how empires fall, but how they are rebuilt. What rises from the ruins, and why some collapses produce something extraordinary. That one is coming soon. Until then, keep asking the uncomfortable questions.